I had just finished work and decided to stop by the grocery store on my way home to pick up a few things for dinner. It was a quiet night and I found a parking spot easily. As I made my way inside, I noticed that the store was almost empty, with just a few customers scattered throughout the aisles. I made my way through the produce section, picking out some fresh vegetables, and then headed towards the meat section. As I was browsing, I noticed a man in a hoodie walking up and down the aisles, eyeing the other customers suspiciously. It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. I continued shopping, grabbing some bread and eggs, and then made my way towards the checkout. But as I approached the front of the store, I noticed that the man in the hoodie had followed me there, and he was now standing in line behind me. As we waited in line, I started to feel uneasy, like something was off. I could feel the man's eyes on me, and it was making me uncomfortable. When it was finally my turn to check out, I quickly paid for my items and made my way out of the store. But as I stepped out into the parking lot, I realized that I had forgotten something. I turned around to go back inside, but as I did, I saw that man in the hoodie following me. I quickened my pace, but he kept getting closer and closer, and that's when I heard him whisper something under his breath. I didn't know what to do, so I kept walking, hoping that he would lose interest and leave me alone. But he didn't. He followed me all the way to my car, and as I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door, he lunged at me, grabbing me by the arm. I screamed for help, but nobody was around. The man tried to drag me towards his car, and I knew that I was in real danger. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. I then heard the sound of sirens nearby, and the man let go of me and ran off. I was shaking with fear, completely out of it after what had happened, when the mall security officer who had responded to my call helped me get to my car safely. But my fear wasn't over yet. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I thought that I saw the man in the hoodie behind me, his eyes filled with malice. I made it home safely, but I couldn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the events of the evening over and over again in my head, wondering what could have happened if the random mall security hadn't arrived. Since that day, I've been very more careful and aware of my surroundings, but it still terrifies me to know that that random man in the hoodie is out on the streets, probably trying to do the same thing to other people. When I was a kid, growing up in a very small town in the 80s and 90s, my parents often left me and my little sister home alone for a few hours at a time to run errands. My mom had 2 brothers, and we lived in the same town as one of our brothers and his family. Being a close-knit family, my cousins and I were always over at each other's houses. The adults would leave us alone a lot back then. It was standard to tell kids, "Don't open the doors for anybody and don't use the stove." And we never thought anything about it. After my parents divorced, it happened more often as both my parents worked different shifts at their jobs. My sister and I lived in town, and my cousins and my grandma lived outside of town, with only a few neighbors nearby. So my sister and I got the best of both worlds, city kids and country kids. Because we lived in such a small community, everyone knew everyone else. And I think we all felt perfectly safe that nothing bad would ever happen. And if it did, our neighbors would help us. Around the time that I was 8 or 9 years old, I began to get strange phone calls. It would be a man's voice on the phone, and these calls would almost always come when I was home alone. This person would tell me that they could see me, that they knew that I was alone, and that they were coming to get me. When I would get these calls, I would usually just hang up without saying anything. Of course, it terrified me, but I was too scared to tell my parents. I was scared by the calls, but I also liked getting to stay home alone. Being left to take care of my sister made me feel grown, and I didn't want my parents to stop leaving me in charge. Stupidly, I kept the calls to myself. One day while my dad was at work, my cousin, who was a year older than me, was at my house. We were watching TV and playing when the phone rang. She answered it and her face went pale. She hung up and started crying. I immediately asked her what was wrong and she shook her head, saying, "I can't tell you." I pressed and she finally told me about how this man would call her a lot when she was home alone, always telling her that he knew she was by herself and he was going to come and get her. I was shocked. I explained that I had been getting the same calls and we immediately agreed that it had to be one of their older brothers or friends playing a mean joke on us. We calmed down and kind of laughed it off. I didn't get another call for a while after that, so I almost forgot about it. In the summer between 6th and 7th grade, my grandma had taken a part-time job and my mom lived in another town. So my sister and I were home alone almost all day every day while my dad worked. We spent our days outside playing in the yard, riding bikes around the neighborhood and tanning in our backyard lot. One day my sister had gone to a friend's house and my cousin was back over at my house. We were listening to music and dancing around the living room when the phone rang. I picked it up and there it was, the voice. At this point, I was 12 years old and I developed a little bit of an attitude. When the man told me that he knew that we were home alone, I laughed and said, "Liar." He waited a moment and said, "I can prove that I know you're alone." I laughed again, a little more nervously this time, and said, "Oh yeah, well then do it." His response was, "I love that little yellow tank top that you're wearing today." By this time, my cousin had turned off the music and was watching me, so she saw when the color drained out of my face. I was freaking out. I had just gotten a new outfit and I was wearing it, a yellow tank top and jean shorts with matching yellow and pink patches. I yelled out, "Leave us alone," and I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. I started crying and I told my cousin, "It was him, he knows that we're here alone." I ran over to shut the living room curtains and my cousin said, "I think we should call somebody." I agreed, but instead of calling the cops, she picked up the phone and tried to call her mom at work. We got no answer. I called my dad's work and left a message with the gate guard to have him call me back. As we were debating what to do next, I had the gravel on our driveway crunch under the wheels of a vehicle. I ran to the window and peeked outside to see a small red car sitting in the driveway. I didn't recognize the car. I didn't recognize the man and woman inside of it either. In our tiny little town, even if I don't know someone's name, I surely would know their face, but I didn't know either one of them. I froze with fear as I watched them talking to each other, and my cousin ran to lock the back door. We had no weapons and no real way to try to defend ourselves other than my softball bat, which was outside in the carport. As my cousin came back into the room, she hissed, "We have to hide." My cousin hid in a small space between a tall bookshelf and the wall, and I threw myself behind a recliner, which faced the window. I watched in horror as the woman walked up to the front door. Instead of knocking, she tried the knob. I tried to quiet my breathing, convinced that she might be able to hear me, and I watched her shadows through the curtains as she walked around to our carport. Sure enough, I heard the doorknob jiggle. There was a pause, and then the door shook as if someone was trying to force it open. I covered my mouth and forced myself not to scream. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped and everything went quiet. I was too afraid to move, so I just waited. I have no idea how much time passed by, but eventually, we heard the car backing out of the driveway. Once I got the courage, I ran to peek out the window again to make sure that they had really left. I saw no trace of the red car, but I was still racked with fear. I told my cousin that she could come out, and we hugged each other in relief. Even though we were scared to go outside, we decided to get on our bikes and ride to the office that my aunt had worked in. And once we were there, we told her everything. The phone calls and how long they had been happening. The red car and the description of both the people inside. She immediately had called the police and we had to give our statements about it all. When my dad got home from work, he asked me why I had called the gate guard, and my aunt filled him in on everything. And from that moment on, we weren't allowed to stay by ourselves again until I was probably around 16. And we never heard anything else on the case, and we also never got any more random phone calls again. It's been years and I still think about these situations often. We never found out who made those calls or who those people in the red car were. The phone calls could have just been some mean prank, and those people could have just been simply trying to rob the house or something. But the coincidence that day was crazy. I have no idea if the man kept watching us as we grew up, but the whole thing definitely made me paranoid about a lot of things, and I always make sure to keep a weapon near me at all times when I'm home alone. Now, as a single mom, I'm forced to leave my kids alone occasionally, and I am overly protective with them, giving tons of instructions and rules about what they can and can't do. They may roll their eyes at me, but I know the dangers of the world and I'd rather be safe than sorry. I'm gonna start this story off by saying that at the time this happened, I was a 19-year-old sophomore in college. I was living on campus in their apartment-style dorms, and my college wasn't exactly in the nicest part of the city. So I would usually drive a little bit farther to go grocery shopping so I could be in a little more of a safer area. The night that this happened, I was going to cook dinner and I realized that I didn't have some of these spices that I needed. Normally I would have just said forget it, and I would have made something else. But the meat had already been thawed for a day or so and I needed to cook it. I debated just going to the Walmart that was like 2 minutes away from my campus, but it was getting late and I didn't want to go there by myself in the dark. That Walmart is right next to a major highway, and being a girl by herself, I felt uncomfortable risking it. So instead, I went to the Walmart that was about 20 minutes away, just a few towns over. I got to that other Walmart and I bought my spices, along with a few other things, and checked out, no problem. By the time that I was done, it was now completely dark out. I was back at the driver's side of my car and putting my few bags in the passenger seat when I noticed a woman, maybe in her 50s, looking at the back of my car. At the time, I drove a really old car, and if you knew your cars, it would be surprising that it was still running. I've had a few people in the past, older men usually, look at it, or come up and ask me about it. I figured this was what that lady was doing, and I kind of ignored it until, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come around my car and stop about 2 feet behind from where I was standing. I was parked next to a parking lot median, so it's not like she was getting in a car next to me. "Excuse me," she said. I turned around saying, "Yeah," kind of prepared to answer. "What year or model is your car?" "My church is giving out leftover boxes of food from our food drive to people in need. Could I give you one? We have them in our car over there." This immediately set off an alarm in my head. I mean, she had just seen me put my groceries in my car. Why would I need something else if I had just gone shopping? Also, the churches and food pantries around my college were usually cleaned out after they had their shopping days, for the people who really relied on things like food drives. There was hardly, if ever, anything that was just left over. I had watched enough Criminal Minds and read enough Facebook posts to know that this felt like the classic lure. I shuddered over my words a bit at first, trying to figure out what to say, but I finally got out. "Oh, no thank you, I'm good. I'd like to see it go to someone who could really use it." I felt like that was an okay response if she really was handing out boxes. "Are you sure? They're just right over here in my car," she said, taking a step and making the gap between us a little smaller. I was panicking. As she stepped closer, I tried to nonchalantly put my hand in my bag and look for the small pocket knife that my dad had given me. My mind was racing as I tried to find the knife, but also to try and keep my face looking calm and not suspicious. I repeated to her that I was good and that the box of food should go to someone who could really use it. She finally seemed to let up, saying, "Okay, have a good night and God bless you," and all that stuff. I told her to have a good night as well, and then as soon as her back was turned, I got into my car and I locked all of the doors. As I pulled out of my parking spot, I noticed that the car she was walking to had 3 large men standing at the trunk of it. They were barely illuminated by the parking lot lights, but I think it was an early 2000s white Nissan. As I tried to go down the parking lot aisle as quickly as I could, I saw the men looking at the back of my car, just like the woman had. I then noticed where their eyes were shifted to. They weren't looking at my car, but they were looking at my license plate. Just as I got to the end of the aisle waiting to turn, I saw 2 of the men get in the front seats, and the other man and the woman get in the back seat. Their car started and they started to pull out too. I was having a full-blown panic attack now. Just a week before, my mom had posted something on Facebook about how 2 men had followed her and her mom through a Walmart. Again, I had watched enough crime shows to know that this wasn't painting a pretty picture. I finally got my opportunity to turn, but that car was coming up behind me. I made the quick decision to take a really odd way back to campus. I made a ton of turns and went through a lot of small streets instead of taking one of the 2 main roads. I don't think that I saw the car again after I pulled out of the parking lot, but I was definitely not risking it. By the time that I got back to my college, I had calmed down a little bit. I started to wonder, maybe you're overthinking this, and believe there actually are good people in the world. And I decided if they were really just giving out boxes of food, then hopefully it does go to someone in need. That was until I was walking behind my car, heading towards my building. There was an SF faintly written in white sidewalk chalk on the brown paint of my car. I was shocked and terrified, knowing that I definitely did not put that there. I said out loud, "Oh my God," as I practically dropped my bags on the ground and rushed to wipe the chalk off with the sleeve of my jacket. My car had been tagged. After a few seconds of wiping, the chalk was gone, so I locked my car, grabbed my bags, and raced into my building. I got into my dorm and saw the dinner that I was supposed to make, but I lost my appetite completely. I put everything away and went into my bedroom, still reeling over what had happened in the last 45 minutes. I sent the whole story as a Snapchat video to some of my friends, who were just as shocked as I was. My one friend Sarah said that she thinks SF stood for a single female. It made sense, which made the whole experience that much scarier. I called my mom afterward and told her everything that had happened, and by the end of the call, she was sending me an Amazon package with pepper spray in it. I didn't go out after dark or by myself for about 2 weeks after what had happened. I'd have a friend from campus or work go with me, or I just wouldn't go at all. The whole situation was terrifying, but I think the strangest part about all of it was that I was supposed to be in a safe area. I drove all the way to that Walmart because I had a bad feeling about the one that was closer to me. I started going to the Walmart that was closer to me after that, and I've never had a negative experience at the closer one since I've started going. It's hard to believe that all the stuff I've seen on TV and on the internet could have almost happened to me.